Good afternoon and welcome. I am, as you can see, our names will be up there. I am Lucille Height, and it is my privilege to welcome you today and to serve as your host for this program. Our planning team has worked hard to create an interesting, informative, and entertaining program. In addition to those of PPH residents who will participate in this program, the whole team consists of Sylvia Metzler and Marge Sexton, and I want to say thank you to them as well. This program will contain music, poetry, and speakers. At the end, we will all join together in singing Sweet, Sweet Spirit. The rest of the program is self-explanatory, and you just need to follow the brochure you should each have in your hand. I now introduce Shannon Greb, and she is the Vice President of Marketing and Communications for the Philadelphia Protestant Home. Hello, Shannon.
Hello, Lucille. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. As Lucille said, my name is Shannon Greb. I am here today to represent the Philadelphia Protestant Home Administration. Normally, John Dubik, our president and CEO, would be here. However, he had an obligation outside of PPH. So first, I want to thank you, residents, for putting together this wonderful program. And when John asked me if I would step in, I, of course, jumped at the opportunity and was thankful and honored to be a part of it. I know I was one of many people last year here and probably across the country. I never heard of Juneteenth until PPH put on the first annual Juneteenth program, and I couldn't believe I didn't know about it. So I did a lot of research on it and learned about it, and I, like many others, assumed that Emancipation Day happened almost 2.5 years before Juneteenth, and I know that Evelyn will be telling us a bit more about what the significance of the date is. PPH celebrates and embraces diversity. In 25 years of me working in senior living, I would often get the question, do you have any diversity in your community? And most times I could not say that we did. When I joined PPH, when I get that question now, I can smile and say, yes, we do have quite a bit of diversity here at this community. So events like Juneteenth, I know that I can speak for John. We appreciate the fact that residents put so much effort towards it. Discussions like this, especially in light of recent events in this past year in particular, have really, have really risen these discussions to the top, and I think it is important. And we appreciate this event and future events. I know there are an impressive lineup of speakers today and information. I hope everyone enjoys the program, and again, we thank you from PPH for putting together such a thoughtful and meaningful program. So enjoy.
Thank you, Shannon. And now, I am going to introduce you to Grandma's Hands. Fascinating program, that is. Grandma's Hands was written by Bill Withers. And Bill Withers chose this to begin our Juneteenth program because it reflects back, we choose Bill Withers' selection to begin our Juneteenth program because it reflects back to the time just after slavery and honors the powerful influence of strong women in helping the family to reclaim itself and to grow and flourish in love and safety. Bill Withers' grandma, Lula, was born in 1868. These hands he wrote about her are powerful. Their faith resounds through the church and the community, joining in with everyone else, asserting the sense of belonging that the child finds so reassuring. The hands perform too, staking out the beat, that teeters the music and the ritual to the church and a community that understands itself. These hands did a lot of saving. They understand, they give comfort, they issue warnings that are wise, tender, and protective. In America Black culture, grandmothers are held in high esteem. And this performer makes that point in her interpretation of the song. This performance by a young Philadelphia artist whose name is Bethlehem, yes, her name is Bethlehem, was recorded live in Germantown in April, just recently. You will see in this video how effectively the young artist uses her hands to emphasize the story. And now we are going to show you the video, and you're to listen to Grandma's Hands, and the words are in your program.
Grandma's hands clapped in church on Sunday morning. Grandma's hands played the tambourine so well. Grandma's hands used to issue out a warning. She'd say, Billy, don't you run so fast. Might fall on a piece of glass. Might be snakes there in that grass. Grandma's hands. Grandma's hands soothe the local unwed mother. Grandma's hands used to ache sometimes and swell. Grandma's hands used to lift her face and tell her, she'd say, baby, Grandma understands that you really love that man. Just put yourself in God's hands. Grandma's hands, oh, that man. Grandma's hands used to hand me a piece of candy. Grandma's hands picked me up each time I fell. Grandma's hands, boy, they really came in handy. She'd say, Maddie, don't you whip that boy. What you wanna spank him for? He didn't drop no apple core, but I don't have Grandma anymore. When I get to heaven, I look for Grandma's hands. Oh, Grandma, 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 I look for my Grandma's hands. I look for my Grandma. Thank you.
June 19, 1865 was the final action of the United States to end slavery and to begin the slow trek toward the truth declared in the preamble of the Declaration of Independence, which states, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." In 1820, the abolitionist movement began to free the 3 million slaves. Some escaped Canada to northern states. Some were freed by their owners. A few purchased their freedom. In January 1860, Abraham Lincoln, a Republican, was elected president to the United States. Tensions mounted between the northern and southern states over the issue of the industrial growth in the north and the agricultural life of the South, which required the continuance of slavery. 8 southern states succeeded and established the Confederacy. They were joined by additional southern states. The Civil War began in 1861. In September 1862, President Lincoln, needing forces to join the Union Army, which was losing the Civil War, and wanting to preserve the Union, he delivered the first proclamation indicating that all slaves held in the northern states of the Union would be freed as of January 1st, 1863. About 186,000 freed slaves joined the Union Army, and 18,000 joined the Navy. 38,000 former slaves died in the Civil War. The Confederate States expected to be victorious in the Civil War, and they wanted Western expansion. As such, after President Lincoln's proclamation, they moved their slaves to Texas to await the victory of the South and the continuance of slavery. News of the ending of slavery through the ratification of the 13th Amendment of the Constitution was kept from the slaves held in Texas. On June 19, 1865, General Gordon Granger arrived in Galveston, Texas to free the last group of slaves. 250,000 were still held in captivity. 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation signed by President Lincoln on January 1st, 1863, and ratified by Congress in December 1863 as the 13th Amendment. The date has been shortened by eliminating the 19 and is known as Juneteenth. It is called Freedom Day, Jubilation Day, Emancipation Day, and Liberation Day. The first Juneteenth was celebrated in Galveston, Texas in 1866. Juneteenth is celebrated usually on the 3rd Saturday in June. In 1980, Texas was the first state to approve Juneteenth as the day of celebration. Juneteenth is recognized now as a state holiday or a day of celebration throughout 47 of our 50 states and the District of Columbia. That is, except in Hawaii, North Dakota, and South Dakota. Juneteenth is celebrated with festivals, parades, concerts, and many other ways. The Juneteenth parade in Philadelphia will not be celebrated because of the COVID restrictions. Special celebrations will take place at the African American Museum in Center City. Activities and observances will be held at the Johnson House. Various activities will be held in Philadelphia from June 17th through July 4th. Mayor Kenney has announced that city offices will be closed on Friday, June 18th in observance of Juneteenth. It pleases me to tell you that one of the items on the program requires updating. It is my privilege to announce that yesterday the United States Senate passed a bill to establish Juneteenth as a national holiday. After passing passing by unanimous consent, the bill now heads to the House of Representatives, where its passage is assured. Then on to President Biden's desk for signature into law. It is quite likely that next year, when we hold our 3rd annual Juneteenth celebration, we will celebrate it as the 12th national holiday.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Kim McGarry. Most of you already know me from the front desk, some from admissions, and a few of you were able to get to know me personally. But today, I get to share with you my beautiful, intelligent, biracial daughter, Ariana McGarry. Ariana currently attends Cabrini University, majoring in psychology, criminal justice, with a minor in American Studies. She's in the Honor Society for both majors. She's on the president's list. She will graduate a year early and continue her studies to eventually earn her doctorate degree to become a forensic psychologist. At the age of 13, Ariana wrote such a powerful poem that touched my heart and made me realize my little girl grew up before my eyes. As you listen to this poem, close your eyes. Imagine a child at the age of 13 reading this to you. The poem is not just about race, but how every single person on this earth should be viewed. Not everyone can accept someone that is different from themselves, but I have always taught her that showing kindness, even when someone does not deserve it, it will always make you stronger in the end. Ariana, if you can come up. Thank you.
The title of my poem is What Am I? What are you? The same question I keep getting. What am I? I am human. I think and perform just as you do. I am a girl who fathoms upon what life is. What am I? I am mulatto. I do not classify as one race. What am I? I am boisterous. I live life like it will end tomorrow. But the real question is who? Who am I? I am not a what, a thing, or an object. I am a human capable of making my own decisions. I am a biracial girl who knows the difference between right and wrong. I know my place and where I stand. Who are you?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tom Sexton, and I have the honor of introducing our guest speaker, Bob Groves. Bob was born and raised in the Oxford Circle section of Northeast Philadelphia. He went to LaSalle High School, and then he attended LaSalle College, after attending local Catholic elementary schools. Bob has 2 master's degrees, one in urban studies from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, and another degree from public health from the University of Massachusetts. Bob has a 40-year career in health and human services. He was a CEO of Health Promotion Council of Southeastern Pennsylvania. He was also CEO of Philadelphia Senior Center. And here are some of his retirement volunteer activities. Greater Philadelphia Coalition Against Hunger, the School District of Philadelphia, the Center for Literacy, Temple University's Osher Lifelong Learning Institute instructor. Courses include human rights, democracy, and climate change. Bob is a social justice activist in support of groups such as Project Home Philadelphia, the United Nations Association of Greater Philadelphia, and Indivisible Philadelphia. And on a personal note, Bob told me that when he attended LaSalle College, he was greatly influenced by one of the Christian brothers there and led him down the road of being a social activist. I've known Bob for a long time, and I know no one who's more committed to making our world a better place. And what Bob does is he makes sure he's informed. He studies, he researches, he gets the facts, so that when he talks, he really knows what he's talking about. And most people I know are not willing to do that. But that shows the fire he has inside him for social justice. It's my pleasure to introduce Bob Groves.
Thank you, Tom. Appreciate that kind introduction. I could go on and on about Tom Sexton, but I won't do it. It'll be all good. I also want to mention today that my wife, LaVon France, is here, and we provide me moral support. And I'm really happy to be here with all of you. I need to put my glasses on. So, I'm here to talk about Juneteenth and why it's important to me, and hopefully why it might be important to you going forward. And it's great news that it's going to be a national holiday. That was terrific. Juneteenth, this is the general order, the official general order that Lincoln instructed General Granger to give in Texas on that day in 1865. And I guess I'm struck by the strength and the specificity of the language for 1865. Not only are all slaves free, but they are to have absolute equality of rights and rights of property between former masters and slaves. That's what they were saying at that point in history. Abraham Lincoln to Gordon Granger, the general who made the announcement to the people listening. I'm struck by that specificity and strength. Also, you may be familiar or know that there's a new book about Juneteenth that's been written by someone who is a great writer who's from Texas, Annette Gordon Reed. She wrote a terrific book, if you're interested in history, The Hemmings of Monticello, An American Family. And it's a terrific book, and you can learn a lot from that. In any case, I haven't read this book yet, but anything she does, I highly recommend. So I want to kind of share with you my reasons, my big reasons why I think Juneteenth matters. And first of all, and why I hope it would matter to you. The fundamental belief I have, and that all of us are created equal as human beings, and that slavery is simply an abomination wherever it takes place. Second, if you believe in democracy and not its alternatives, Juneteenth should be important to you. We have struggled in this country to create a multiracial democracy that consistently honors the rights of all people, of all races, and we have come up short over history. We get some progress, and then we go backwards, and we know we got a lot of work to do. Juneteenth represents one of the ongoing attempts to help recognize and further establish that vibrant, just, multiracial democracy. And it's great news, like I was saying, about the federal holiday. Perhaps we can celebrate it in conjunction with July 4th in the future. Also, my third reason is if you care about the future of our country, I suggest we should care about Juneteenth. Because if we're ever to understand and love each other truly as citizens, we must know and understand our full history and stop weaving white supremacy into how we are taught it. Juneteenth helps us do that. All of us, blacks, whites, Asians, Latinos, are victims of inadequate history instruction and overall lack of history that this country seems to perpetuate in many ways. Not only through our classrooms, but through the civic culture that we live in. On a personal level, you may know and love black people. And of course, honoring them can help you also honor Juneteenth and why it's important. In conjunction with why it matters overall, it's mostly been a celebration in Texas up to now, which Texans have known about, like Annette Gordon Reed. And it's always been a pushback against the information gaps and lies that we've been taught, or not taught, in our classrooms. And today now, thankfully, it's part of a larger movement to improve in this realm. So Juneteenth is really on a path with other things, and it's great that we're moving forward. I want to point out from the Merriam-Webster dictionary the definitions of racism before I go further. So we have it on the individual level, as we know. We all are challenged from time to time, if not always, with this issue of believing one race is fundamentally stronger, better than another. But also, and perhaps just as, if not more important, is the structural systemic racism that unfortunately a lot of people like to deny in our country, even if they're willing to admit individuals can be racist. And this is a situation where oppression of a racial group, it happens to the advantage of the social and political and economic advantage of some other group. And we've got tons of examples, including redlining in neighborhoods where black people couldn't live, racial profiling, lack of access to health care, etc. But a third element of racism, again, still from the Merriam-Webster dictionary, is a quote from Angela Davis, the black activist from the 1960s who is still with us and I believe still teaches at the University of California. And she says, one of the many ruses racism achieves is the virtual erasure of historical contributions by people of color. And I think truer words were never spoken. And I'm going to focus a bit on this concept as we go forward today. So, I'd just like to say that, this obviously depicts the challenges we face in our classroom. And it's a combination of incorrect facts and complete ignoring of other things. And it reminds me of a thing that happened to me a few years ago. I was teaching, I was volunteering to help a teacher in a third grade classroom in Philadelphia, which I did for 3 years here in the city. And I'm standing there one day at recess, and kids are going back and forth, not settled, and I noticed this book sitting in front of me and where all the books are displayed for the kids to read. And it's a book about Thomas Jefferson. And it's a third grade level book, so it has a combination of pictures and words. And I open to the first page, and I see copyright 1967. So as soon as I saw that, I went, before even going any further, I went, uh-oh, this might not be too good. So if you peruse through that book that was available to this multiracial class of kids at third grade at that school, you will see almost nothing about slavery, but among other things, you will see a picture of slaves happily holding Thomas Jefferson on their shoulders as he returns to France, smiling and happy because their master is back. So that was a book from 1967 floating around a schoolroom 4 years ago. I spoke to the teacher about it, and she was actually very chagrined about it and took it out of circulation. But there it was, and I'm sure it's not the only situation where that's occurring. Before I go any further, I just want to say a few words about my own background. As Tom mentioned, I was born and raised in Philly, Northeast Philly, about a mile from here. If you walk down McGee Avenue, which is right outside this building, you'll hit Max Meyer's playground, where I spent many a day playing basketball and baseball growing up. 3 blocks from there on Horrock Street is the house I grew up in, that my parents moved into near the end of the Second World War. And so this general area, of course, is something that I'm very familiar with. Life in Northeast Philly row houses in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s did not include seeing black people in person, except for cleaning ladies. They came up Busselton and Castor Avenue on the 59 or 59B bus to clean some people's houses, not mine. But that was really my only physical interaction with black people for many, many years growing up here. A little bit more in high school and college, and I could go on and on about that journey. So that was the experience of many thousands and thousands of people in Northeast Philadelphia. However, I did see this guy. Anybody know who he is? Davy Crockett. It's that Fess Parker, mid-1950s, the Davy Crockett Show, which I and millions of others were enthralled with. King of the Wild Frontiers, we know. I'm sure people are thinking of the song right in the jingle in their head right now who saw it. I won't sing it for you. You might not like that. It might not go too well. My singing is not my strength. But it was Disney at its best in the 1950s. Huge impact on the culture. I had a coonskin cap and my air rifle, and I was Davy Crockett. Guess what? They forgot to tell us something important. Davy, when he died at the Alamo, was fighting to extend slavery into Texas in 1836. And even though they lost that battle and he died, that's what happened. Slavery came forward, moved into Texas in a big way, and we've been struggling ever since with Texas. In any case, it's a great example to me of mass culture misinforming or not informing the wider culture and perpetuating stereotypes and myths that have led us to where we are today in many ways, and the struggles we've had in between. General Sherman mandated, through Lincoln's approval, that 400,000 acres of confiscated Confederate land were to be distributed to formerly enslaved persons. And Sherman used the phrase, "You'll get 40 acres and a mule," to get started. Within 6 months, amazingly, 40,000 black Americans were actually settled on that land due to the 40 acres and a mule. They could have and begun accumulating wealth and going forward from there. As we know, Abraham Lincoln died in April of 1865. Andrew Johnson countermanded Special Order 15 in August, and they took the land literally back from the slaves they had given it to. Now just imagine if we had been able to go on from there, and for many of the other Reconstruction initiatives that the country struggled with through about 1877, when Reconstruction was destroyed in total. So this is another example of things we don't know too much about, but they could have made a big difference. So now, all of a sudden, we all know about, perhaps, the Tulsa Race Massacre, which happened only 100 years ago. And it's all over the place. There's a great PBS documentary right now. I encourage you to watch it. But wait, 100 years later, we find out about it. Apparently, people in Tulsa didn't know about it. 300 people died, and it was called the Black Wall Street, as you may know, where things were destroyed, the Greenwood section, and it just was literally knocked to the ground. There's lots you can read and understand about it. Like I say, I recommend the documentary. So you may know a few other examples, though, of things that have happened to black people in our history that were made known. I mean, there was the murder of Emmett Till in the 1950s. Perhaps you've heard about that. Or you probably know that Dylan Roof, a young white male, walked into a South Carolina church about 5 years ago, pretending to be there for an educational program, and killed 9 black people. Things like that. But a lot of other things have happened, and I can just give you a few examples here. How about that Pierce City, Missouri slaughter of 1901? The Slocum, Texas massacre of 1910? The Forsyth County, Georgia, quote-unquote, racial cleansing of 1912? Or the Rosewood, Florida massacre of 1923? All these are things that have been left out of our history, and there's many, many more. So, you know, we can do a lot better, and we can do better across the board in our schools and in our culture. So this is my little history update. There were many black people who challenged slavery as their fate and fought back for their freedom. There were many white people who were their allies, and we can do a lot looking at that. The abolitionists that you probably know something about. However, one big thing, and this is where I think people get caught up today, the American Revolution was more than one thing. Yes, it was the greatest expansion of democracy the world had ever seen, and it did inspire others. There's no question about it. It inspired the French Revolution and many, many more things. But guess what? Political equality, natural rights, and sovereignty of the people applied only to white males in the American Revolution. And that fundamental problem and point is where we've been struggling from ever since. And we have made progress, but we have to accept that it's more than one thing, in my opinion. And there's good news here. This is the current issue of National Geographic magazine, which has been making a real attempt for multiple years to address issues like this. And I highly recommend this issue to you, Reckoning with Our Past. It is really something, and they have been doing good work in recent past, as I said. Other things I want to mention, media, the broader media culture, the culture of commercials on TV, what we see on TV and can see in movies and films, is much, much improved. You can watch TV at any time these days and see diversity that you literally couldn't see, I'll say, 10 years ago, certainly not 20, 30 years ago, or when most of us were growing up. It was mostly whiteness. But we do see that today, and that's progress, and I think we need to recognize that and keep that as part of what we go forward with. But we do have issues in our civic culture that are hanging on strongly and are seemingly desperate to keep white racism in some level of power and visibility. A lot of it has to do with monuments and other cultural situations that you can come across. Again, from National Geographic from February, it took, in December 2020, Virginia Military Institute finally removed the statue of one of its past teachers, Army General Stonewall Jackson, you've probably heard of, who was not only a Confederate general, but owned slaves. And it turns out that cadets, up until a couple years ago, were expected to salute as they walked by Stonewall. Why are we saluting a guy who owned slaves and tried to destroy the country up until about, whatever, 2010 or 2015? I don't get it. But at least his statue's down. Other examples. There's still, as we speak, about 1,940 memorials, statues, and other public symbols of the Confederacy in 30 states and Washington, D.C. And that doesn't count 10 military bases and over 100 public schools, universities, and parks named after Confederates right now. Monuments, markers, highways, schools, and other symbols named for this guy, Robert E. Lee, 46 have been removed, but there's still 215 out there. Jefferson Davis, the president of the Confederacy, 147 are still in place, 28 have been removed. And our man Stonewall still has 107 statues in place in 30 different states. So we've got work to do. And while we can't pretend these people didn't exist, and there's debate over what should be done with these statues, minimally they should be in museums, some of them, where people can learn about who they are. But it's clearly time to make a change here if we want to move forward. Also, poor teaching of history is not limited to African Americans. The Holocaust from World War II. According to the executive director of the local Holocaust Foundation, younger generations have lost connection to this history. She says people in their 20s and 30s, millennials, Gen Zs, about 20% are not aware the Holocaust even happened, and 50% cannot name a concentration camp. So when I say we have work to do on our history, I'm not only limiting it to the issues of Black Americans, it's across the board. We have to do a lot better, and it's not impossible. Now, I'd like to switch gears a little bit. There are things we could be doing as we speak right now to help in this process. There is an effort around the country, there's a struggle over voting rights. And there are attempts in states and in different parts of the country to limit voting rights of Black Americans in particular. But there's a bill in Congress that was passed by the House of Representatives recently and is up for discussion and debate this coming week called the For the People Act. And it would really put a damper on what is being tried in states around the country to limit access to voting around the country. And it's not clear whether it's going to pass or not. But if you'd like to get involved in anything, contact your senators here in Pennsylvania and urge them to speak out strongly and support the For the People Act. They can also vote for another bill, the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. John Lewis, the famous civil rights activist who died a few years ago, and congressman, which will help protect the country from a Supreme Court ruling in 2013, where the Voting Rights Act of 1965 it was challenged, and states were given the right to do things on their own that they didn't have before 2013, and has led to more attempts at voter suppression. So those two acts you can be supportive of if you're interested. As you may know, there is a debate going on right now about how we teach history. And I want to mention that is over so-called critical race theory, which we could spend hours on. But essentially all that is trying to do, in my view, is to make it harder for us to teach about what's really happening in this country. And there are states that are passing laws to limit what teachers can teach in the classroom. There's 4 states that have already done that. So think about looking at that. Now this is some data from the Brennan Center for Justice at New York University School of Law. And you can go on there anytime to find out what's happening here. But according to this past week, there's some good things happening and some bad things happening. But we need to look at both and see what we can do. Between January and May, 14 states enacted 22 new laws that restricted access to voting. But 14 other states did enact 28 laws to expand voting access. There are currently 61 bills to restrict voting moving through 18 states. 31 bills have passed either their House or their Senate. 389 restrictive bills have been introduced in 48 states in the 2021 legislative session. 18 in Pennsylvania have been introduced to restrict voting. I got it. But lawmakers have introduced 880 to expand voting, as I said, and 21 are in Pennsylvania. So there are good things happening and struggles back and forth. The jury's out on what's going to happen. But just for consideration and to show you kind of the struggle in graphic terms, specific terms. Another thing which I found shocking recently, I was reading the sports page, which I do every day, the Philadelphia Inquirer. It was on May 15th. And I was reading it about something called race norming. It was a very short article called Sports at a Glance. And this is a letter that I wrote to 6 Inquirer sports writers after reading this little piece. And I started out by saying how I'm a regular reader and I like what they do. And I was reading this, and it's all about the issue of what the National Football League is doing to help former players who have brain injury, who, as we know, there are many, many of them. And in particular, what upset me was this statement in the article, that there's a settlement going on, as you may know. The NFL has insisted on using a scoring algorithm on the dementia testing that assumes black men start with lower cognitive skills. Therefore, they must score much lower than whites to show enough mental decline to win some kind of lawsuit and award to help them out. The practice, which went unnoticed until 2018, has made it harder for black former players to get awards. And to me, as I said to these columnists, if that's not systemic racism, what the heck is? How do you create an algorithm which guarantees that just because I'm black, I'm going to have a harder time getting an award if I'm coming from the same background as these white players? I also said, finally, I must ask why no one from the Inquirer Sports Group has written about this in an ongoing and serious way. And I read the sports page every day. I'm a big sports fan. I know about this. I've seen movies about this issue. No one really knew that the NFL had this secret algorithm where black former players had a harder time getting, and their families, getting financial rewards from this process, this challenge. So I got one response from a guy named Mike Sealski, who some of you may know. And he says, thanks very much. He said he's written about this issue in the past. He'll talk to his editor about possibly exploring this topic. Now, I sent this to 6 or 7 sports writers, 3 or 4 of them were African American, but this is the only response I got. But it's an issue, and how do you, that's a clear-cut issue of systemic racism in the structure of our society, ongoing. So, as we come down to the home stretch, recognition and celebration of Juneteenth is part of the struggle for justice, in my opinion. And justice means specific things. It doesn't mean one-off actions or making announcements or hiring one person. It means systemic changes for long-term, sustainable, equitable outcomes for generations to come. That's what justice really means. And Juneteenth is part of the struggle for that, in my view. Now, this may seem like an overwhelming task, but it turns out there are groups and individuals who are already, and have been for quite a few years, doing a great job of introducing a better way to teach history into classrooms in this country and around the world. One of the resources for that, not the only, but one that I think is particularly good, is Facing History and Ourselves. And you can go online and see all about them, and they'll have videos and everything else. But Facing History and Ourselves tries to, and puts together, as witnesses to the bigotry we have and the legacy we are dealing with, ways to help children, and I mean we're talking first grade to 12th grade here, ways that things can be taught that engage people, that allow kids to debate, to feel comfortable with each other, and to bring this thing forward. So my main message on this is what I'm talking about doing doesn't have to be invented because no one's ever done it. There are people doing it. It just needs to be widespread and put in many, many systems, including in Philadelphia. And probably there's some people in Philly already using this. So, why Juneteenth matters? For me, if you have a fundamental belief that all of us are equal, it matters. If you believe in democracy and not its alternatives, it matters. If you really want us to figure out a way to love each other and get a country together in an equal way, Juneteenth is part of that effort. If you care about the future of our country, how much longer are we going to be like this? And when I say future, I don't mean some abstract concept of the future. I mean, damn, these little kids walking on JFK Boulevard a few months ago. Are we going to subject them to the same kind of poor history teaching and civic culture that all of us were unfortunately given? These are the kids that we could really help out if we could take action today. So, ending on what I consider a positive note, Amanda Gorman, who wrote the great poem at Joe Biden's inauguration, hopefully you've seen. I could read that thing over and over again. There's so many great lines. One of them is, though, being American is more than the pride we inherit. It's the past we step into and how we repair it. And she also said that our country is not broken in that poem, just unfinished. And we can look at it that way. We don't have to think that we can't do anything. We can be optimistic. We can move forward. There's groups like Facing History and ourselves. So I encourage you to think about it that way and maybe get involved. So thank you. I have some resources here at the back.
Thank you, Bob. That was wonderful. Great education. I stand here before you today as a proud Black woman who is filled with encouragement in the movement of Juneteenth. Last year, I stood before you and presented a reflection on racism in the past, present, and where do we go from here. Today, we are moving toward where do we go from here, and it begins with understanding Juneteenth and why it's important. This day is drawing more attention in light of Black Lives Matter's protests against police brutality sparked by the deaths of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, Rashad Brooks, and many more. Although Juneteenth has long been celebrated in the African American community, this monumental event remains largely unknown to most Americans. Part of our history has seen acts of violence and intimidation directed against Black people. Though Juneteenth's history is based on the history of slavery in the United States, it shouldn't just be solely about remembering injustices. It is also a time to celebrate freedom and equal rights. We must acknowledge the horrors of slavery and the strides that still need to be made by reminding yourself that this is a time to celebrate strong people and steps forward. For many white Americans, recent protests over police brutality have driven their awareness of Juneteenth's significance. Juneteenth is a part of America's forgotten history. it is essential that we expose all Americans to the importance of the African American influence on society. Celebrating our diversity and embracing our differences is an opportunity to learn, uplift, and empower. This is an opportunity to engage, break down racial and cultural barriers. Confronting the realities and the legacy of racism, both in our community and the world at large, requires commitment by you, your families, and friends. We must be relentless in our efforts to eliminate racism and strive for equality and justice. We are now in the season where the global demand, the intergenerational and multiracial demand is for systemic change. We must treat Juneteenth with all the fanfare and we do as we do for the 4th of July and Memorial Day. This Juneteenth and every day of the year, it's time to speak out. Action must be rooted in reflection. Reflection is just one step on a longer journey. We must identify concrete steps to enhance commitment to structural change and anti-racism. A quote from Pastor Jack's article in The Reach titled, God's Dream of Shalom. Life is a race that we only win when everyone crosses the finish line together. We can never be comfortable in our own shoes while others have none. Action steps can be done through teaching, research, interaction, and partnership with those around us. Some of these steps could be connecting with the local racial justice organization, such as the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund, which works for the achievement of racial justice, equality, and inclusive society. Or visit the Black Writers Museum in Germantown, Vernon Park, where you'll be able to view exhibits of classic and contemporary Black literature and its authors. Johnson House in Germantown is an historical site where the role of the anti-slavery movement and Underground Railroad took place. Now streaming on Netflix, a doc-series, High on the Hog, looks at the history of African American cuisine. And coming on July 4th, a new series from the Obamas aims to teach civics through music. The show combines music and animation to educate a new generation of young Americans and about the power of the people, we the people. Also, PPS, we have the African Americans' Many Rivers to Cross. This was written and presented by Professor Henry Louis Gates, Jr., Director of the W.E.B. Du Bois Institute for African and African American Research at Harvard University. This is a six-hour series that explores the evolution of the African American people as well as the multiplicity of cultural institutes, political strategies, and religious and social perspectives they develop, forging their own history, culture, and society against unimaginable odds. As Bob showed on the book on Juneteenth by Annette Gordon-Reed, and it is a wonderful book. I read it and it doesn't take that long to read. Annette Gordon-Reed, a Harvard historian, Texas native, presents a concise, personal, and scholarly history that illuminates the emotional truths of what Juneteenth means to her and to the rest of the nation. The book is a combination of memoirs, essays, and history, showing that racism by no means a thing of the past. You will be given Texas history with threads of Mexico and its own republic from 1836 to 1846. There are connections to people of African descent, which goes back centuries. You will explore aspects of Texas history culminating with the celebration of Juneteenth, which came after the Emancipation Proclamation before the ratification of the 13th Amendment. Now my charge to you, are you ready to be a change agent? Are you going to keep your eye on the ball and not forget what you need to do at this time of crossroads in American life? You have the power to make changes and cry out for justice whenever you encounter or see injustices against others. And finally, I leave you with this verse from Proverbs 3:27. Do not withhold good from those whom it is due, when it is in your power to act. Thank you. And now we're going to end our program with singing a hymn, Sweet, Sweet Spirit. But before we sing that, I want to give you a little background of the hymn. Sweet, Sweet Spirit was written by Doris Akers, an African-American gospel composer, in 1971. The gospel hymn came about on a Sunday in 1962 when Miss Akers was preparing the Sky Pilot Choir, which she formed from the worship service at Sky Pilot Revival Center. During the practice with the choir, Miss Akers told the group she didn't believe they had prayed enough. They were accustomed to spending time with her in prayer before service and asking God to bless their songs. Miss Akers felt prayer is more important than great voices. The choir had already prayed, but this particular morning, after Miss Akers asked them to pray again, they did so with renewed enthusiasm. As they continued to pray, Miss Akers began to wonder how she could stop this wonderful prayer meeting. She finally stated to the choir, "We have to go to the Revival Center, but I hate to leave," and stated, "There is such a sweet, sweet spirit in this place." Thus was a new song born. And we will now sing, which will be on the screen, Sweet, Sweet Spirit, and Lucille Height and myself will lead.
Sweet, sweet spirit in this place, and I know that it's the Spirit
afternoon. We hope that you enjoyed this program as much as we enjoyed presenting it, and I can't tell you how much I have learned this afternoon. So I know you have learned. Thank you so much for coming.